Okay, Amber, where am I? Here I am. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at what we have, Amber. And I think you're off to a really great start. This is really unique. I think it's really neat. I'm enjoying it. I am. I love your descriptions too. Um, I mean, my first inclination was to say don't fill in the closed counters of the lowercase e's, but you've got a reason for doing so, and that's okay. So one of the things I'm trying to illustrate here is that as a designer, no matter what you're designing, whether it's letter forms, whether it's a layout, a brochure, typography, color, you always have to have a reason for the choices you make. So at first, I didn't know there was a reason here. I thought it was an arbitrary choice. My first inclination was to say, don't do it. It's creating a lot of weight right there. But since there is a solid reason, and that reason conceptually ties to your development of meaning based on the letter forms and how they associate meaning or how they're assigning meaning to the story, or conversely, how the story assigns meaning to the letter forms. That's okay. I'm fine with it. It works. Okay. The letter forms themselves I want to comment on, but I want to also comment on the assignment specifications and the requirements. Okay, so right now there's a little misunderstanding right here. Right now, what you've done is you've identified a lot of these anatomical portions of letter forms. But that's not really what the assignment is asking. The assignment is asking for you to go in and identify common components and characteristics that can be duplicated to create new letter forms. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back in here and say, okay, the stroke for the vertical stem for the cap T is the basis for the vertical stems for all of the letter forms that have vertical stems. Okay, so what you're saying is that this is going to be reused for the vertical stems. The stroke is going to maintain that aspect ratio, so that if you're going to create a smaller stem, the smaller vertical stem for the lowercase I, for example, is the same mechanics as the vertical stem for the uppercase T, okay, and so on and so forth. So again, you're using it for the vertical stem for the R, right? And then conversely, we can say that this right here, this what's that called, a branch or a spine for the H, can be used to duplicate for the N. So to turn this H into an N, all we have to do is cut off that ascender, right? But the N is a little different. So these are things that I want you to do. I want you to look through these letter forms and say, hey, I can use this to create this portion of the letter. All right, let me give you another great example. All right, so you see these tittles that you've created for the I? They're pretty weighty, and I'm thinking that we can do something here too, and that's fine. I mean, that's just fine. It has meaning, right? But what can we do with our letter forms to create these? Now, an easy fix, right? So all you have to do is say, okay, so the vertical bar on my horizontal bar on my T, I'm going to cut off about that much of it, and I'm going to use that for my tittle. So you're creating this harmonious consistency by using different portions instead of drawing letters or areas of letters that need to be drawn to create new letters. Use what's already here, okay? So create the tittle out of that little portion of the cap T, or that portion of the cap T. See what I'm saying? So instead of drawing it over again, use what you already have. All right, and those are my recommendations for that portion of the assignment, in that you want to identify common characteristics and components that can be duplicated when rendering new letter forms. The next thing I would recommend is taking a look at your strokes. I think the strokes right now are a little thin, meaning that I would thicken up these areas of all of the letters. And the reason I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to zoom out. Now you'll see this, but I'm going to zoom out. And when I do, I want you to see what happens to the letter forms. Okay, do you see how some are still visible while others aren't? The parts that are visible have thicker strokes associated with the parts that aren't don't. So for example, that portion of the G, we see that perfectly, right? But what I would recommend is just thicken up the whole thing, the whole stroke, just a little bit, pixel or two tops, not much. You still want to maintain this kind of really extreme contrast differences in the thickest thins and the thinnest thins. I think that's one of the charming parts of the letter form itself. So my final comment would be to try to maintain some consistency. I'm using this as a straight edge, so just note the top of that. So the consistency of placement, okay? And so I would say, okay, so all of these letter forms need to be consistently placed on that baseline. And then conversely, if I use the bottom of this as the top of my straight edge, I can come over here and say, and watch your X heights, make sure they're all consistent. But I think that conceptually, one of the visual attributes you're assigning to this and its association with the tree is kind of these different varying placements and kind of wispy, indicative of branches of a tree. And I think that's important. So I think you're okay there. Okay, so those are my comments and those are my recommendations. So try to address those for your final submission for the task. You don't, for the milestone. You don't have to resubmit for this task unless you want to. If you want to address these and resubmit, I'll be glad to comment before your final submission. But those are some of the changes that I'd like to see for your final submission for the milestone. All right, good job. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.